Okay, thanks, Paul, for introducing us again. It's great to be moderating this session. My name's John Miller. I am a reformed consultant, recovering consultant, maybe. My background is in data strategy and data architecture, and I really enjoy being hands-on keyboard. I've got a great opportunity to moderate the authors of the Implementing Data Mesh book uh, because I was a technical reviewer of the book, and I really got to. I've spent at least a decade and a half getting to know Eric Broda, one of the co-authors, and I'd like Jean-Georges and Eric to introduce themselves, and then we'll get into the discussion today.
I guess I can start this time. So Eric Broda out of Toronto, Canada. As John mentioned, we go back a long, long time, 15, maybe longer than that. I senior executive at banks, insurance companies. Last 7 years, had my own boutique consulting company doing, of all things, data mesh and weaving in a little bit of generative AI, API platforms, etc. Jean-Georges.
Ouais. So Jean-Georges or JGP, I co-wrote this book with Eric. I wrote this one alone. Uh, uh, and but I'm a software engineer by training, but I maybe I'm a recovering data engineer in some way to parallel what John was saying. Anyway, I'm really excited to be here and happy to chat with all of you guys. Please send questions. I'm fed up with John's question.
Yeah, and yeah, I'd like to sort of echo what Paul was saying at the beginning. This discussion is interactive and it's a lot of fun when there are audience questions. We've got prepared material. These two authors could speak to fill up the entire time, or so could I. But we really love it when there's audience participation and if there are specific questions, or if you've read the book or want to understand more about the audience of the book, please feel free. I will ask either Eric or Jean-Georges to explain who the book is for and what got them interested in putting this book together. And then we'll get into the topic this week, which is really about how do you scale data mesh and both from an architecture and an organizational point of view. So who wants to start this, kick us off and tell us about the book, why you wrote it, who it's for?
Uh, I'll do this time. I think Jean-Georges did a great job last session, so hopefully I can cover this reasonably well. So, the audience is the data practitioner, as well as the person that is responsible for actually building data products, data contracts, and data marketplaces. The audience can also be executives who are trying to accelerate their data mesh journey, and that's a critical part because as we'll talk about later today, it's not just technology, but there's a significant organizational component unless you can kind of do both those together. So it's a pretty wide audience. And kind of why we wrote it is we think, and we've heard from the community many times before, is we've read Zamek's fantastic original book, and it sets an outstanding vision. The challenge, though, is what do I do next? Where do I start? How do I go about implementing data products or data contracts or data marketplaces? And that's what this book is about. So it's very much geared towards a practitioner audience, but also the executive who wants to enable their practitioners to deliver data mesh, data products, or data contracts quicker, better, faster, cheaper.
Yeah.
Nothing to add.
Nothing to add. Well, so, I think the last webinar I mentioned that, and it comes from Scott Hurlman, who does the foreword in the book, but he talks about the purpose of this book is in some way to not be your blueprint for how you would do something in your organization, but to help you. And I like the way he says, focus on the decisions that matter when you need to make decisions, and what are some of those important decisions. And that's buried in the content of this book. And so, why don't we start by talking about the premise of this webinar about getting to scale, data mesh at scale. So, who
I see a big rush here.
I just figured because I answered the first question, Jean-Georges, with tag teams, so you're it, buddy.
Can you rephrase the question so a French person can understand it?
we, yeah, let's not try to pretend I can speak French. So, this is about implementing data mesh at scale, this webinar that we're
Yeah.
hosting. And we said we'd talk a little bit about the architecture and practices to build data marketplaces, data products, data contracts, data mesh at scale.
Mhm.
So, what are the things you think about or that stand out when you think about data mesh at scale? Let's start the discussion, and if you're listening in and you have questions about any of the topics that we've mentioned, please go ahead and ask.
So there's a few ways to answer a question. That's why I ask you actually to rephrase it, John. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make fun of you or anything. But the, um, the first thing is, it might be surprising, but Eric and we don't always agree. Uh, and I know it must came as a revelation for a lot of people hearing us. And we are still friends. I think even more than we used to, I would say, before the book, which according to O'Reilly is pretty uncommon. Um, that we we're still there because we don't have the view. So when you were talking about the forward and what Scott wrote in the forward and having this um, we're not giving you one recipe to implement data mesh. We're articulating different ideas that uh, can be seen as a framework or as guided by the different chapters and the organization of the book. But there might be you might spot some differences between some of the chapters I wrote or some of the chapters Eric wrote, okay? Because there might be not a 100% alignment, which I think is good, because otherwise you wouldn't buy a book by two offers, you would just buy one by one offer. Uh, but it also means that where we were less sure of something, we didn't cover it. Okay, so that's also something that I think make it permanent, pertinent. When it comes to scale, there's a lot of different ways of how you can see scale and define scale. Um, my perspective on that part is more like let's let's um, let's see how the mesh itself scales. Okay, and it's not the performance of it, but more like how does it scale when you keep adding data products. Okay, so the basic metric of a data mesh is data products, and as you add more and more, it becomes more and more complex. So one thing I keep in mind is trying to quantify how much data product and the growth you're going to have when your platform is ready. Okay. Um, I was discussing with various people, even very recently, and people were telling, "Oh, we're planning to have 10 data products the first year." Um, I may have cited this example, but I know a company in Spain where they had back in January 800 data products and growing at a pace of 100 a month. Okay, so you in a way you need to be a little bit more realistic about your scale. Uh, But it's also not going to be, it's not hyperscale like billions of users of billions of data products you will find. Okay. When I was at PayPal and we implemented data mesh, we looked at the number of users of the current tools, okay? And based on the users of the current tools, you're not going to have more than that, or not in the short term, right? So that's one way to find indicators. In terms of volume, like number of data products and things like that, start by looking at how many data sets your company has, because that's also going to be something that is pretty relevant. Or it's going to aim at that part. Okay, so I think that you've got a few indicators you already have in your company. So I think that should ease the calculation, the early calculation. So,
Yeah, so I like that you took the word scale and really started to define it in terms of both how we can think about, is it a measure of the number of data products we implemented, for example, or maybe thinking about the number of total users you're impacting, looking at the current tools and saying, hey, how much of that installed base can I move to my mesh? And you also said something really important as well, which is in addition to data products, you were saying, look at the number of data sets you have in your organization. And I think that's a really fascinating additional way of thinking about scale. And Eric, I'll ask you to define a few ways of talking about scale. And Jean-Georges, you can always pile on or correct my understanding. But when you think about data sets in an organization, how do you even get to a number like that? I mean, in your experience, what is the process of figuring out how many data sets you have in an organization? That's a fascinating one for me.
Yeah, I'll give you my perspective. First off, in terms of figuring out how many data sets you have, John and myself had the opportunity about 15 years ago to work at a very large bank. And it was a major transformation. John, I don't know if you remember, we actually had one of our very first architecture diagrams, which showed the linkages between the apps and the data underneath it. And it was so complex and big. It looked like an integrated circuit diagram. In fact, the executive printed it on a 6 by 8 page so that we could actually make any sense of it. So here's the thing: is every modern organization runs on data and has immense volumes of it and immense they're all different formats, different structure. Some will be images, some will be documents, some will be traditional databases and such. The bottom line is data is a core element to delivering value in the business. So really, if you can make better use of your data, then and we think data products, data contracts, et cetera, realize that value. The only question you have to ask is how do I find my data products and then how do I build them as fast as possible? And that's where the at scale concept actually comes into play. And we think there's kind of three things when you from my consulting days, way back when, early in my career, we always looked at people, process, and technology. And if you could actually get those three in sync, you would actually be able to realize your vision. You'd be able to deliver on your mission, if you will. And if you didn't get any of those, if one of those were out of balance, you tended to suboptimize in your capability and capacity. So when I think of at scale, how do I go about building data products better, faster, in a more agile way, and hence deliver value? There's really those three things you got to think about. So from the people side, arguably the most challenging, you need to figure out how do I have people that have the right skills, the right knowledge, the right training to create data products, identify data contracts, and implement those. From the technology side, where most of us kind of start off, is it probably the easiest because it's something that we're very comfortable with. But obviously, you need to think about performance and stuff like that. How many data products will I have, and do I need to run them on the cloud, and how do I scale horizontally, vertically? That's I think a relatively well known science. It's crucial, but it's reasonably well known. The people side is not as well known. The other piece, which we've seen, is you're not generally building one data product, you're building many, whether it's 800 or 80 or most start with 8 and then grow from there. But you need to think about the process. So in our book, there's a few concepts around the data product factory and how do you enable that. And what you're going to find is a theme broadly across all of these is this notion of data contracts. They're the things that bind the actual data products and allow them to actually interact. But it's also the vernacular, the semantics by which the process gets structured. So if you understand the semantics and you understand what one data product is expecting from another, you can actually start to build those at scale. And if you standardize those with data products, then you can really supercharge it. So there's an intersection of people capacity and capability. There's an intersection between technology and last but not least, the process by which you actually deliver these things. And when we think of at scale, delivering data products and data mesh at scale, that's what we kind of talk about in the book.
Right. So covering reframing the question about scale by defining it as a balance between your capabilities of your people, the processes around the mesh, and how you govern data, and also the technology that supports data mesh. Uh, so that's great. What uh, what should people start with when they think about getting to scale? Because most of us start at a place where we either have one or a number of those capabilities in place, but how do you get to scale and, where do you start?
Um, I'll take that one on, and then I know Jean-Georges has some great ideas on this one, but it all starts with your first data product. Maybe that's intuitively obvious, but it's definitely worth stating. So I always come back to for your first data product, if you can find something that delivers value by delivering data capabilities predicated on data, and you can do that better, faster, cheaper, whatever the case may be. But the core is you're delivering business value. Um, then you can get your first data product out the door. Okay. Now here's the thing is that first data product, if you've done well and you've realized the promises that you may have made to the executive community and your sponsors, then and you've delivered on that, you have momentum. You have the wind at your sails. You have somebody at an executive level who is your best salesperson, which allows you to build the second one, and then the third, and then the fourth. Now, once you get to probably, I'm going to say, once you get to the fifth one, you start to realize, unless you start to think about data contracts and how do I structure a common way to look at data products, you very quickly become what do they call it? The proverbial data mess, as opposed to with two S's as opposed to an SH, the data mess. So really, once you've started and you got a little bit of that momentum, you really have to start to think about, again, process, people, technology, and how do I actually align those to allow me to build these capabilities at scale, and what is the foundation, whether it's technology, process, or skills and training that enable my people to do that. So it starts with one, and there's usually an inflection point around five where you're going to start to have to think about different things. Our proposition, by the way, is you think about those up front.
Jean-Georges, you're shaking your head in either violent agreement or you have something to say. I would love for you to
I
pick
need,
apart what Eric said or add to that, add some color to that around.
yeah, I need to be careful about my body language. Huh?
Yeah, the
So,
violent.
so I'm Greek actually, so that means I approve. Uh, just kidding. No, one thing I really agree with Eric is find your find your first one, find your first data product. Make sure it aligns with it brings value. Okay. Um, that it doesn't have to be a huge one, doesn't have to be a small one. It's really about, and I think this is not repeated enough. Okay, so really create a value, show the value, find your champion, and then go build more. One thing I slightly disagree with Eric there, uh, it happens, Eric, you know that, is I am the kind of person who's thinking contract first. So for me, the data contract comes before everything, and it's okay if I think I'm tolerant enough to understand other people's point of view. Uh, but but uh, but I like this organization of having the contract first. It doesn't have to be a very complex contract. It can start by something really simple, uh, really, not really filled a lot, not really, um, not too complicated, but it's part of your definition of the data product. Okay, so that's where I a little bit differ, but not a big deal.
Okay, so uh, let's define a couple of these terms just so that we're all on the same page. Starting with the data contract. And I know you guys talk about it well in the book, and I've read it all and reviewed it all. But for our audience, when you say start with the data contract, give me an example of how I could do that. I remember last week's session, I'm thinking, okay, I can't wait to apply what Jean-Georges is saying. How do I apply it in my case? And that's when I start asking questions that are about my customer and how I help them implement data contracts. But how do I teach us a little bit about how you think about data contracts, just a definition, and then how do you get energy in an organization to building your first data contract rather than data product? Or maybe I'm misunderstanding what you're saying.
No, no, no. It's you're there. I see the maturity. As I'm looking through the different companies I've been advising or building stuff with, is there's always this level of maturity you're going through, um, and trying to apply, the principle of agiles, where is find value quickly and deliver value quickly. Uh, Even if you've got a little bit tech debt at the point, or even if you don't have your documentation state of the art, blah blah blah. Okay, so going back to the Agile manifesto in a way, and when I'm thinking about that, I like to start by the data contract, because the data contract can already provide value very quickly. It can replace documentation, for example. Okay, when once you have uh, your data contract filled, you can easily add the documentation, update the documentation of the data you're serving through the contract. Okay. Um, and this is already providing value. Then, to go back to what you were saying about what, for me, my definition of a data contract is, um, it's an agreement between one producer, usually one producer, and one to many consumers. Okay, so on regarding how the data is structured, delivered, etc. Uh, it's um, it's also the link between the between the physical implementation of the data and the logical representation of the data. So it allows you to think about, okay, when I'm talking to business, they don't need to know that the varchar 32, but if I'm talking to Cindy, who is a data engineer, I'm going to I need to have her thinking about the varchar 32. Um, and the third is, it also describes what I call the metadata. Okay, so it's really the behavior aspect of the data, like the data quality rules, SLAs, but basically what I more and more call data QoS, data quality of service. So that's, for me, that's part of what the definition of the data contract. When you've got a data contract defined like that, the additional part, what you realize is that your data contract becomes your source of truth for your metadata. And then when you've got the mindset of thinking that's my source of truth for my metadata, then everything else not is not trusted. Okay, we dropped something from the book which was kind of building a zero trust architecture. But the thing is that that's it. The thing is, if your data contract is your source of truth, then all the rest is potentially not trustworthy. So it means that if you've got a schema change and an upstream data set or database or whatever, you will be able to compare it to your source of truth. Okay. It will define your SLAs. It will define all these things directly. So that's a part of the data contract. But it's almost contractual. Okay. So it's already providing value, but it's not enough to make a product out of it. So the product for me is an iteration of these data contracts. Okay. And then what you bundle different data contracts within your data product. So you can start directly with the data product, but that's why you're coming back to the data contract just enough to at least consider it as your resource descriptor. And that's how we started at PayPal, to be honest. So yeah.
So let's add some color to that. In terms of the technical, there's a contract, and maybe that's also part of the process you're talking about. But how do you um, teach, convince, or explain why you're building data contracts, a new idea into an organization? Uh, can you start bottoms up? Do you have to start top down, or how do you introduce data mesh by starting with the data contract? Does that question make sense?
I think it does. I I think I'm more like an opportunist in this way, where I'm looking at where the path of least resistance is going to be. Okay. And so it can come from the top or the bottom or and people say the left or the right. And the thing is, it's basically saying trying to analyze where who can be your champions, okay, and deliver and cater to them. Uh, Now, there's always obviously it's not like a personal initiative in a company where saying, "Hey, I just decided to make a data product," right? It's probably coming from the top, rarely from the bottom. But I'd say it's this kind of complex exercise where you've got to satisfy everybody, right? So if you don't satisfy your user, you're not going to get adoption. If you don't satisfy your leaders, then you lose your financing, your funding. So it's this thing. But if you're not satisfying your user and they're not using it, then the funding will stop anyway. Okay, so it's kind of this. It's not a vicious circle. I think it's a good circle, and making sure you take care of all your stakeholders as you go through the exercise.
Okay, good. So you're bringing it back around for me. Uh, and please, audience, ask questions, or you'll hear me discover with these.
They're shy today, huh?
They're very shy today. But um, yeah, you're bringing it back around to the concept of a product because ultimately you need to bring that product discipline to data and the agile to data, which we talked about last time. And uh, and that's how you satisfy end users. You're still thinking, you're still customer oriented on the folks that need to use the contract, but so you don't think about it alone.
So it's probably going to be a little blurry, but you see it here. We on the subtitle, okay, we really mentioned data product pretty big, okay. So to
Yeah.
make sure that yeah, it's really about the product
Okay, good. So you and Eric are agreeing.
Of course, we
Okay.
agree. It's on the very little details we
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Eric. What else
No,
would
I was going to say, I think Jean-Georges has a very compelling perspective on data contracts. The challenge I found is with me, with most of the organizations I work with, they do have the 10 million data sets or whatever it is that exist already. And for those that, and the metadata happens to be embedded explicitly in the databases. So in that context, what I find is what I call contracts, data contracts light. And what that says is the metadata is the data structure or the set of artifacts that exist today, and however you put a boundary around those. But what the data contracts light approach says is capture that metadata. But if you want your data products to interact with each other in an ecosystem, then it's also the data contracts, because the data products by their nature are somewhat new. The data contract also defines how data products interact with each other. And one of the things that we found is there are some clear business oriented nomenclature and semantics around the data product, but there's also probably some very simple common technical semantics that you want to have. So for example, every data product may want to have a slash observe endpoint. And I say slash observe in quotes because the implementation of the endpoint would be much different, but there would be a slash observe endpoint. There may be a slash usage endpoint. There may be a slash certification status endpoint or other. Those are also pieces of the puzzle that get defined in the data contract. Yes, they're not business oriented. What we found is if you actually have some basic rudimentary capability in every data product, again, ability to be observed, to be discovered, to find usage, etc., that becomes incredibly powerful. That is part of the data contract also, in addition to the nomenclature on how data products themselves interact from a business data perspective.
No, that's great addition. Um, as you were talking, it reminded me that we've talked about data products, but we haven't necessarily defined them as elaborately as we did last time. But, and I don't know that we need to, but a little bit of definition around a data product, and then explain the third tier or the next concept that you're talking about, which is data products sitting in a data marketplace. So can you add a little bit of definition around those two concepts?
Yeah, sure. I'll start. I'll start on this one. The canonical definition, if you will, around data products from Zemak's book. They have a boundary, so there's a clear articulation of what's in and what's not in. They have an owner, somebody who is empowered to make decisions on behalf of that data product. They're self-serve. In other words, whether they're discoverable, they may be observable, etc. But there people can actually access these capabilities directly. And there's this thing called federated governance, which we can talk about a little bit later. So that's the canonical definition. But I always like to come back to a higher level perspective. So I look at data mesh actually as an ecosystem. It's an ecosystem of data products. And those data products need to be able to find each other. And once they find each other, they can interact and they can transact. So that's effectively what an ecosystem is. There's very common capabilities, ecosystems out there. They're not data mesh ecosystems or data product ecosystems, but Uber is an ecosystem that allows people who have cars that want to offer rides and people who want rides. It allows them to find each other, interact, and transact. So different nomenclature, different domain. It's not data, it's cars for Uber. Airbnb is exactly the same. People who have properties they want to rent and people who want to go on vacations and take those properties. Data mesh in this context does that, except not for cars and not for properties, but for data. So it is an ecosystem of data products. And what data mesh lets you do is allows those data products to find each other. They're discoverable. It lets them interact consistently using data contracts, and in certain cases, let them transact. Depending on your perspective, maybe that means exchanging of money, but it also could mean just moving data around in a very consistent, stable, resilient fashion. So if that in fact is the case, and I believe strongly it is, the analogs in the industry, Uber and Airbnb, still apply. So let me give you the next level to talk about data marketplaces. So when you go to Uber or Airbnb as a consumer, first thing I want to do is I want to find what products are on the shelf, what properties, or how do I advertise the fact that I need a ride, for example? Well, I have some semblance of a marketplace. So as a consumer, I'm able to say I want to have a service, or I can actually see the services or data products that are available. So that is part and parcel of a consumer experience. Where does that consumer experience actually occur? It occurs in the data marketplace, the window into your ecosystem. Um, it is the tool that gives you visibility into what data products you have and how they're actually interacting and potentially transacting. So that's the key pieces of the puzzle. But the second related to that is for those that I have not done, I've never been an Uber driver, and I have not had a rented a property, but I've read a lot about what they have for producers. So if I'm a producer, I want to offer my rides, my car for a ride, or I have a property that I wish to make available for rent. These platforms have a very compelling, easy to use capability for producers to actually publish their wares. In a data mesh, it allows data producers to create data products easily and put them into a marketplace so they can be found. So the key thing that I see is the whole notion of the data mesh, the ecosystem. It is that platform that allows data producers and data consumers to find each other, interact, and transact in a consistent manner. So in that context, that's where concepts like a marketplace come into place. It's the thing that actually that's the visual veneer to your data mesh. And I think that's the thing that all too often we don't necessarily bind together in one unified whole, which we've done in the book and built on Zemac's legacy, if you will.
So just to add a little bit, I see that we have more and more questions coming in, but that's great. Uh, People are always shy at the beginning, but I'd like to point out to page 106 of the book, because all what
106.
Eric just said, it's summarized a little bit there. And I like the vision of Jean-Marc through the experience plane, where you when you're thinking that your middle plane, okay, which is a data product experience plane, that's where you're actually building your data product on where they kind of live, okay, there. Um, and When you elevate them to the next plane of existence in a way through the mesh experience plane, that's where you can actually gather all this meta information into the marketplace. But marketplace is one of the benefits, but you can imagine plenty of other things like tooling, monitoring, security, optimizing the different data contracts that will take place at this higher level. And that was page 106. And then what you can do is you can define a capability model, okay, that will tell you how you can actually mature your different components of your architecture, okay, and marketplace is one, but you can think about feedback loops, policy management, etc. All that taking place in this in those plans, and that is page 110.
Yeah, no, that's actually, it's good. I'm glad you referred to the book again because, you know, one of the reasons I really like the way you've structured it is that the first part is sort of getting into the basic concepts. The second part is really more of the details, designing, building, and deploying data mesh. And then part three, and that's where you'll find this stuff around experience planes in chapter seven. And then part three really gets into operating model, teams, roadmaps.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it is really powerful. I see a couple of questions came in, one from Abhishek and one from Catherine. Let's start with Abhishek. His context is he's in a large banking institution. He asked a really important question. I want you to, well, actually, you can both answer how to effectively balance data governance and providing accessibility at pace, at speed. to maximize the value of enterprise data at scale. And so how do you incorporate effectively balancing data governance and accessibility at pace?
So I don't know if you want to take it, Eric, because
No, you go ahead. You start. You start this time.
okay, you're the bunk guy. Okay, so
Well, I was
uh,
going to say you're both can put on your financial services hat.
okay, my fintech. So I mean, like I think the way I'm thinking that is that nobody likes to do governance, okay, except the people that are in place in the data governance team, and they're really usually suffering and a lot. Our best ally when we were building data mesh at PayPal was actually data governance because they saw that we would be able to simplify their life through data mesh. And also is because when you're thinking about the concept like a marketplace or what Eric talked about just before the data product factory, okay, is all those are helping to collect enough information for governance. Okay, when you've got a data contract can be super rich, and this information um, right now, when you're looking at a lot of companies, this information exists maybe in a Confluence page somewhere, or in a README somewhere, or in a Word document on a SharePoint server. So the thing is that there's no structure being provided around that. When you go with data mesh and what we took in the book, uh, we say, okay, if you add these things to a data contract, for example, then you take this data contract from the plane where it exists and you push it to the marketplace or to your Colibra or to whatever. Okay, so you're doing a lot more integrations than actually building new software, but you enable this integration that did not exist before. Okay, so I think that's how I picture, and that's how I see the role of data governance and the synergy between data governance and data products.
That's good. And I'd love to get the large bank that's not a fintech, that didn't start as a fintech like PayPal. I just know those 100-year-old banks think about things slightly differently than PayPal might.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm going to ask you for your opinion on the same question, Eric.
Yeah, sure. I actually do work for these very, very big banks and insurance companies. So Abhishek, I definitely understand the question. Let me kind of give you a perspective that I found actually works very, very well. And I agree with Jean-Georges, where unfortunately, very unfortunately, governance has turned into that proverbial four-letter word. Um, it doesn't have to be. In fact, governance professionals execute a very, very important capability. The challenge I think that many of them have is they don't necessarily have all the tools they would like to have or all the buy-in that they would like to have, recognizing the importance of their role. So here's a few things that we've got that we put into the book, but these are kind of lessons learned. And this is not to take anything away from where folks and how they're doing it today, but there's analogs in the industry that I think are very, very well worth actually understanding and looking. Thanks, George. So that the practices out there around governance are very, very well established. There happen to be in different industries. So Underwriter Laboratory in the US, they provide governance for the products that are in your house. They make sure that the toaster doesn't burn your house down, type thing. In Canada, we have at the Canadian Standards Organization, everything that is allowed to plug into your wall outlet and take power has a little CSA logo in it that designates it as being safe. ANSI, a little bit more closer to technology, is one of the organizations, and what they've done is they've turned governance into a different word. And I think that word actually means a lot, has a very significant meaning. They call it certification. And what that says is they recognize the fact that in a broad marketplace, and I would argue this analog in a large bank, Abhishek, is exactly the same. In a large marketplace, you have to be federated. Okay, there's not top down is not necessarily going to work. There's a few things that though have to be top down. So there should be policies at the top level that say these are the things that are important to the organization. Again, using the toaster analogy, the toaster is not allowed to burn your house down. Okay, so you can probably draw some analogies on what data requirements and policies should actually be, but you have policies that absolutely are a top down mandate, or at least they at the top level of the domain that that the data happens to exist in. Those policies, though, then you need to assess whether that data product is adhering to those policies. So there's an assessment. Typically, you want to have a separate group doing the assessment from the data product team. So there's an assessment capability. But what they also do, and I mentioned it earlier with that little logo that the CSA has, and I think Underwriter Laboratory has, they provide a standard certification. If you have the policies and the assessment has been successful, meaning you've adhered to the policies, you get a little logo. How do we translate that to data products? Well, if you have data policies through data contracts, for example, okay, and then you have the assessment capability around that. A group has said you actually are certified. Then what you do is you make it very easy for folks to find that certification. You publish it. Or you have an endpoint / certify endpoint so anybody can go find it. So now what ends up happening is we've actually realized one of Zamac's goals, which is federated, and I would argue federated self-governance. You have the policies defined by the organization, what's important to them. You have an assessment procedure to determine objectively whether that data product has met that criteria, those policies, and you have a way to publish it. So now anybody can come and find I want to use that that product data set or that customer data set. I can actually see, has it met all the privacy, the security requirements? That's a process that is federated, fast, and agile, and I would argue allows you to do governance at scale.
Good answer, guys. I want to get to Catherine's question because I can see a direct linkage between what Abhishek is saying and what Catherine's saying. And let me connect the dots from the way I would answer that question, Abhishek, because I've spent a lot of time in extremely large banks. And I think my observation is that teaching the governance team that might not have the background in data contracts or using a Git repo or a Git action or, you know, part of what I've observed with data governance professionals is they come with a different background that's more business and process functional, and they don't understand. They do understand, but they don't have lived experience on a tech team, and they don't appreciate how so much of what they're trying to achieve as a data governance organization can be supported and made much easier with these mesh topics like contracts and products. So what Catherine asks is really very cool because she says, looking to start the journey into all things mesh, thinking of that the initial approach is to define the first product and contract within my team where I can get great buy-in using the simplest approach we can. That's exactly how I was thinking about what you guys were saying. What are your thoughts on having one GitHub repo? And this is where it gets the rubber meets the road. Uh, One GitHub repo per domain or team where contracts are created and held, then a GitHub action to validate and publish the data product to a mesh marketplace. So, and then she has a follow-up question, which I'll just throw out there. What are your thoughts on how tools and technologies you use evolve from the first data product to scaling to multiple products, multiple domains? So let's just take it one step at a time. Really just tell us how you've seen or think about this notion of GitHub repos and domains and whether you tie them together or how you've seen that happen. And then let's get into the next part because that's a really practical question. I'm addressing that right now with my customer. So I love the question, Catherine.
So, um, welcome to the journey, Catherine. Okay. It's going to be fun. I promise. It's usually more fun than painful. From what I've seen. So whether you I've evolved quite a bit. So on the domain part, okay. So when you read the principles that Jean-Marc put in place, okay, there's the famous four principles. One of them is to align to a domain. And as much as I think it's a great idea, I also think that it's paralyzing a lot of people because it just the next question is, what's a domain? Okay. And in a company, you ask five different people, what's a domain? You get 10 different answers, right? So I think that it depends also if you're greenfield or if you're brownfield, but if you're brownfield, which is in most cases for a lot of applications, you really think that it's linked to your use case. Okay. So if your data product is linked to your use case, then where you put your data contract on your other artifacts is probably the closest possible to where it already is. And in this situation, let's say it's a Python script that does a pipeline, and that's what you're actually trying to embed in your data product, then use the same repo. Okay. And if you've got 10 different data products, then I would do the same thing, right? The thing is just use the 10 different repos. You can you can always copy, link, reference, whatever your different data products and repos in the structure you're going to build. Okay. And but GitHub Action is definitely a great idea. I've been using that as well, just also to validate that the contract or whether if you're using ODCS or ODPS, are going to validate against that it actually makes some meaning to your set to your company. So I would definitely use GitHub Actions. So
Okay,
yeah, my
good. I just want you to explain two acronyms you used. I think I know what they mean, but the open ODCS and ODPS, those are what?
Yeah, ODCS is the Open Data Contract Standard, which we covered in this humble little book, and which is a which is a sorry a Linux Foundation project, part of the Beetle Linux Foundation project. And ODPS is a work in progress, which is the Open Data Product Standard, which is something that the same project, the Beetle project, is working on normalizing, and there's an early draft in the repo there as well. It's all beetle.io. So.
And I see we're getting very close to time, so I just want to just caution you guys. Short answer to the second part of Catherine's question, which I think is really important. I was thinking about the same question last night. What tools and technologies would you recommend or would you use to evolve from your first data product to multiple products, multiple domains? I think that's million dollar question. But what are your thoughts on how tools and technologies help evolve to that?
Yeah, I can take a stab, but I think my answer is going to be very short because it is everything that Jean-Georges said in the previous question is what you really ought to be thinking about. First and foremost, depending on how deep you want to go into your data contracts, they can, you extend them, they can specify what a data product actually is. They can specify the metadata in there. They can specify the interactions between the two. So one of the very first steps I think that you want to do is adopt a data contract standard approach. And the Bitall project is the one that I think has the most enthusiasm and momentum in the marketplace. So that's where I would start. I think there's once you have that, and if you extend it to, as I mentioned, some of the interfaces, the common interfaces, then you can actually put in, whether it's scripting or otherwise, you can actually start to create the data product template in seconds, not minutes or hours or whatever. So the contract, I'm a firm believer that the data contract is actually the starting point for a lot of the thinking. And depending, like I said, depending on how you extend it, can be quite broadly applicable.
Any final thoughts, Jean-Georges? We're at time. We got 2 minutes left, and I'd like to just see if there's anything else you wanted to add to that, or just sort of parting thoughts for anybody that's attended the session. Listen to this.
Yeah, it's always sad. The questions tend to come a little bit slow, and then we run out of time. Um, I'd say, Catherine and Abhishek, you had great questions. I'm do not hesitate to join the data mesh learning community, okay? And you'll easily find Eric and I there, or us on LinkedIn as well, and we can continue the discussion. And we are happy to give you more links, or uh, as long as you show your proof of purchase of the book, of course. Just kidding.
Any final thoughts from you, Eric?
No, I just first off, I think we've covered a bunch of great topics. Thank you very much for the audience for the questions. Just a few things. We've talked about two of the five cornerstones, if you will, for data mesh. There's three more coming up very soon. You're going to see the same crew, whether you like it or not. My buddy John here is going to be the moderator. My friend Jean-Georges, who apparently sometimes disagrees with me, or otherwise, will also be there with his wonderful opinions, as will I. And thank you very much, John, for moderating.
Yeah. Hey, thanks everybody. And if you like the O'Reilly book series, as we all kind of do, uh, and I'm not getting paid by O'Reilly, but it's so much cheaper for me to buy a subscription. I can get all of the books that I want at the same time, but I also like to get hardcover. So anyway, until next time, thanks everybody.
And thanks everybody. And Abhishek is right, John. You're a fantastic moderator. Thank you.
All right, thanks everybody for showing up, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks in the next session. All right, have a great day. Thanks.
Cheers.